When a police detective in Poland broke into a remote monastery in 1987 to look into mysterious disappearances, they discovered a dark truth about the monks inside. During a solar eclipse in 1957, a priest secretly entered a church carrying a newborn baby, who had a distinctive mark on his left chest. The priest placed the crying baby on the altar and began praying. After finishing his prayer, the priest unexpectedly pulled out a dagger and held it threateningly towards the baby, referring to him as a wicked offspring. At that moment, armed soldiers arrived in the church and ordered the priest to drop his weapon. The priest tried to explain his actions to the soldiers, claiming they didn't understand. However, the soldiers had no choice but to shoot the priest, in order to protect the baby and ensure his safety. 30 years after the event, on an unsettling-looking roadway, an undercover priest and exorcist posing as Father Marek gets off a bus. He finds a church after pulling out a map and lighting up a cigarette. An elderly monk by the name of Prior Andrzej greets Marek and thanks him for coming freely. Marek notices several priests as he glances around the inside of the church. The prior tells Marek that the church is actually a sanatorium, where those who are under the influence of the devil are admitted receiving treatment. Furthermore, the priests who reside in the sanatorium call themselves brothers and consider themselves to be monks inside a fraternity. The prior presents Marek to Brother David, the sanatorium's resident master of all crafts. Inside a remote storage facility, the three of them cross paths. David gives Marek some beads for his rosary, but Marek politely rejects them, saying he has brought his own. As David continues to check Marek's bag, they introduce Marek to the usual operating procedures at the sanatorium. Marek's smoke is seized by David before Prior shows Marek to his room. The prior reassures Marek that he will be comfortable during his stay, despite the fact that there is no phone or power in the accommodations. The prior quickly departs after giving his last warning, and Marek takes his place inside his chamber. Marek appears to be the same baby from the gunshot event 30 years ago, as he takes off his clothing and bares his chest, revealing a strange yet recognizable scar. When he opens his bag, he reveals a secret compartment that is filled with prohibited stuff, including a flashlight, a handgun, and other items. Before putting his bag away, Marek also pulls out a piece of paper and unfolds it to see a little newspaper story about a lady who went missing. Just then, the bell rings, signaling the monks to assemble in the dining hall. Before the priests begin eating supper, the prior conducts the prayer. Marek looks at the food dish, curious about its peculiar flavor and smell. He consumes the odd-looking dish after glancing across at the other priests, who appear to be eating perfectly well. Marek begins his tour of the sanatorium after supper. He finds many rooms with other people who are supposedly possessed by them. He comes across a woman and a priest inside one of the chambers. Marek gave the woman a quick look before going back to his room. After that, he takes a shower. But in the meantime, Marek is unaware that the crucifix in his room has been quietly rumbling. The prior plans an exorcism session in the sanatorium for the next day. Marek and the other monks walk into a chamber, filled with lighted candles. He finds out inside that it was the same woman he had seen in a chamber earlier. The monks are gathered in the corner while she is chained to a bed and looks blankly at the ceiling. From the other side of the chamber, Father Piotr, Prior Andrzej's vice prior and second in charge, gets ready to document the exorcism. Prior to that, Andrzej relaxes the woman and assures that she will be cured with their assistance before they start the procedure. Marek watches as the priest uses holy water to sprinkle the lady during the exorcism. As the previous chapter continues with the holy prayer, the woman winces at the holy water. The woman goes gently around the bed, and he leads the other monks in continuing the prayer in Latin. The lady furiously rises from the bed and growls as the prayer becomes more intense. She is still crying and shaking terribly, making the bed tremble wildly. The lady screams, and the crucifix ignites as the prior presses it against her. Marek returns to his lodgings to wash his face following the exorcism. He looks in the mirror for a while, then freezes in shock as it breaks under his fingers. A short while later, he hears a deep, guttural snarl as the door to his closet opens inexplicably. Marek exits his room and strolls along the facility's corridor. He moves towards an enigmatic door that he finds in the hallway's corner. David shows up in front of him just as he is ready to go inside the strange room. Marek obeys and closes the door after David informs him that he cannot enter the chamber until the prior extends an invitation. The monks keep eating the weird-tasting meal throughout dinner time, but Marek can't handle it. As soon as he gets back to his room, he pukes. Marek pulls out his teeth as soon as he feels an ache in his jaw. His tooth splits open to expose a buzzing insect as he stares at it. In a panic, he pulls down his trousers and examines his mouth under the broken mirror. Marek returns later that evening in front of the enigmatic chamber. From the cross of his rosary, he removes a little pointed metal object and picks at the lock. He enters what turns out to be the prime's office when the lock clicks open. Marek is calmly perusing the shelves when he notices a little hole in one of the paintings. When he touches the artwork, the wall behind it rattles and reveals a secret area. Inside a small storage container, Marek finds a television and many cassette recordings. The woman who was previously exorcised is shown on tape that he plays. The exorcism chamber is where he returns after leaving the prior's office. Upon exploring the chamber, Marek discovers a device that generates wind inside and a system that governs the bed. Additionally, when he touches the used crucifix, he finds the lighter that started the fire behind it. Marek realizes that what he had earlier observed was a fake exorcism. Bewildered, he makes his way back to his room and retrieves the crucifix from his wall, hiding it under a cabinet. The prior calls the monks together for another prayer meeting the next day. He summons Marek to conduct their penitential ritual in front of the podium with hesitation. Marek leads the prayer from the front. He haltingly obeys the prior's instructions to perform the prayer in Latin, pronouncing random phrases from the language. Marek is about to give Father Pyotr the order to take over the penitential act, when Prior Tuanchi steps in. Unexpectedly, Marek swallows hair strands from another dish of the weird-looking food as they are having their meal. In the middle of his meal, he involuntarily gags and coughs, spitting up the food in a hurry. Upon his return to his chambers, he looks over his shoulder and notices that the cross is now hanging back on his wall. Marek then opens his bag and removes the weapon, pocketing it out of fear and nervousness. He destroys the newspaper story about the woman who went missing as well. Puzzled by the strange activities taking place at the sanatorium, Marek walks down the corridors, moaning with frustration. Out of rage, he pulls the locked gates violently, but before he does, he sees some monks outside the sanatorium, excavating a grave and placing a coffin in it. When Marek goes back to the private chambers to see how the possessed lady is doing, he discovers that the room is empty. The vice prior, Father Pyotr, enters the chamber behind Marek and observes him. While he waits for him in the confessional, he asks to be present in the church. They go into the confessional, where they have a private conversation. Marek receives a warning from Pyotr that it would be harmful for him to explore the sanatorium anymore, since the other priests are keeping an eye on him. Marek informs him that he is an undercover citizens militia officer who went undercover to look into the disappearances of women in their community, not a priest or an exorcist. Marek was dispatched to the sanatorium in disguise after finding out that the missing women had been admitted there thanks to an anonymous tip. He goes on to say that the shooting incident involving the priest 30 years prior prevented the militia from conducting a standard inquiry within the sanatorium. In response, Pyotr tells Marek that the exorcisms and possessions are in fact staged to attract the Vatican's attention and funds. Before exiting the confessional, Pyotr gives Marek one more caution. Marek returns to his room later and checks to see if anyone is watching. He moves away from a closet and discovers a black liquid seeping out of a hole. When Marek carefully reaches into the hole and touches the liquid, he finds a strange object consisting of a little bone and an eyeball. At that moment, he gags and spews a black liquid upon his floor. A buzzing sound grows louder as more flies emerge from the black liquid he puked, and he looks down at the floor. Marek observes the door for a while, before turning around and experiencing a delusional vision of the black, unidentified liquid drenching his face. He slips off as darkness falls to find the woman who was exorcised. Earlier, he walks to the cemetery and begins to dig. But Marek finds that the coffin is empty. At that moment, Father David appears behind him and puts a handkerchief over his head. Marek discovers he is strapped to his bed as he wakes up in his room. His handgun is among his possessions that the monks have found. David watches as he strains against the restraints, and then the prior comes carrying 4 pieces of meat into his room. The prior tells Marek how disappointed he is with their failing partnership before they force-feed him 4 pieces of meat. Marek gags so hard throughout his lunch that he passes out. Later that night, he wakes up and discovers David has fallen asleep. He quickly frees himself from the chains and seizes the opportunity to flee. Soon after, David wakes up and discovers him in the act. As a result, they start to wrestle. Marek shoots David dead after he is thrown to the ground after a protracted battle. Marek looks over the bowls that were used for his meal earlier before heading out of his quarters. He heads to the kitchen to find out more about the peculiar meal they are being served. Inside, he finds a freezer filled with the deformed bodies of the ladies he was searching for. Marek quickly discovers that the monks and he has been eating the women's organs for the entire time. He runs into Pyotr in the kitchen, who has been searching for him, and they both glance at each other, startled. Marek brings Pyotr over to an old library, where he is even more motivated to leave the sanatorium. Pulling up an old book, Pyotr describes a ceremony involving the Chosen One. The Chosen One, he claims, was born during an eclipse and had to be slain with a blade right away. The Chosen One will consume 7 sinners and drink an innocent person's blood if he is not killed immediately after birth. Upon completion of the ritual, the selected individual will transform into a demon and initiate the end of the world. Pyotr surmises that Marek is the one selected, and that the other monks and the prior are carrying out the ceremony. It comes to light that Prior Andrzej and the monks are actually priests, who are in the process of calling forth the devil and worshipping the devil. As Marek flips through the pages, he comes upon a picture that resembles the scar on his left chest. In spite of this, he disputes the story out of shock, and together they come up with a scheme to get out of the sanatorium. Marek is invited to accompany Pyotr on his escape as he presents a plan, and points out a secret tunnel that leads outside the monastery. Pyotr then shows Marek the wounds he got after allegedly trying to flee the sanatorium in an effort to win his trust. Marek ultimately has faith in Pyotr and follows his guidance. He shows Marek a little tunnel, and the two of them venture further into the cave. They hear a disturbance behind them, and soon after, two monks corner Marek, immobilizing him in the process. Before the monks knock him out, he turns to face Pyotr and realizes it was all a lie. The sight of the monks from the church around Marek awakens him. While the prior and the church monks assemble in their crimson cloaks, he is once again chained and tied to a wooden pillar. Marek knew from Andrzej beforehand that he was the one who sent him to the sanatorium on purpose, and that Marek was the source of the few anonymous tips Marek received. Marek receives an apology from the prior for the deceit, but he also makes it plain that their actions were all done with good intentions. God and the devil coexist together, according to Prior Andrzej and his fraternity of Catholic monks. He goes on to tell Marek that people are the ones who are bad, not the devil, and that, as a result, they have long since earned their punishment. The neighboring well is allegedly a doorway to hell, which is why the religious monks decided to establish the sanatorium there. Marek, the chosen one, was 800 years in the making before the fraternity as a whole saw him. The devil will come from the well and inhabit Marek's body after the rite is finished. Not long later, the church monks go on to fulfill the rite by obtaining the final prerequisite blood of an innocent person. The woman who was previously exorcised is brought over and forced to kneel in front of Marek. While attempting to dissuade the priest from killing the woman he has been searching for a long time, Marek looks down at her. The priest slashes the woman's throat severely before gathering her flowing blood. The woman's blood was then drunk by all of them from a dish before she was disposed of. Finally, while Marek whimpers, the prior puts the bowl in his mouth and makes him do the same. The church monks call upon the devil with a chant, and the prior conducts another prayer. However, nothing occurs after they finish the rite and recite their chants. While Prior Andrzej looks back to Pyotr to see whether they missed any steps in the rite, Marek lets out a faint chuckle. After going over the old book, Pyotr couldn't find any more directions to follow. The two keep speculating and remembering how they carried out the ceremony. Pyotr becomes outraged and quietly points the finger at Prior when they realize the ritual has failed. Pyotr acknowledges that the other church monks were mistaken in their attitude. He tells them to return to their lodgings and to pretend nothing had occurred the following day. The members start to worry about Marek, since they believe the militia will soon start hunting for him. Before stabbing Marek with a blade, Pyotr turns to face him and apologizes. He looks at Marek until he passes out, and then the monks from the church free him. Marek is then dragged in the direction of the well and thrown therein. Later, Prior smokes a cigarette and drinks away his displeasure over the botched ceremony. He spends the night drinking himself to sleep, not realizing that the crucifix in his room has been flipped upside down. When Pyotr finally makes it inside his room, he is utterly spent. Pyotr appears to be assisting Prior in getting comfortable on his bed when he suffocates him by grabbing a pillow and pressing it on his face. Prior chokes and struggles incoherently for a while, but Pyotr kills him by holding the pillow tightly. The next day, Pyotr had called the women abruptly to the prior's chamber, after the church monks had set fire to their malformed bodies. Pretending to be in mourning, he reveals the prior's corpse to the church monks. Pyotr is now assigned the duties of the prior. As Marek awakens at the bottom of the well, it becomes apparent that he is still alive. He stands up carefully and surveys the bone-encircled well before his body begins to tremble uncontrollably. Inside the sanatorium, Pyotr and the church monks are saying a special prayer for Prior Andrzej's soul. But suddenly, something strange happens to Pyotr. He can't control his body anymore and drops the old book he was holding. The church monks are confused and don't know what's happening. Pyotr starts to make strange noises and can't talk properly. Then he starts floating in the air with his arms spread out like a cross. It looks like he's in a lot of pain. And then something really scary happens. Pyotr turns into a big group of buzzing flies. While the flies are buzzing around, a demon called the sabbatical goat comes out from behind the altar. Inside a special place for sick people called a scary demon called the sabbatical goat. In a special place where sick people go to get better, something strange is happening. The people there are starting to act differently, like they are copying a special symbol. Outside, the plants that were once dead are starting to grow again. This means the dead things might come back to life, but living things might not be safe. In the end, a bad creature is getting stronger inside the special place. Suddenly, the roof breaks and the sky start making loud noises, showing that something terrible is happening, and the world is changing.